You know, when you think about the Bible verse, the way Jesus put it, don't give that which is holy to dogs. Well, why would you? I mean, if you have holy objects, you don't feed them to feral animals. And if you have a bag full of pearls and you happen to be around swine, pigs, why would you give the pigs your pearls? I mean, the whole thing, when you really think about it, you would think that Jesus would have addressed a subject where we had more problems with it than one that was just so self-evidently true. Isn't that so? I mean, I've heard this verse a million times, but the first time I thought about how silly it was that he had to even say it. So you have to start thinking about, why would you tell people something they're not interested in and not ready to hear? You have to be pretty confused in your own mind to do that, as confused as you would be to put your pearl necklace in the pigsty. But there's another factor here, which is something that Swami has talked about, Swami Kriyananda. One of the many extraordinary qualities that Swami Kriyananda had is that he could take extremely elevated ideas, and he understood that it wasn't enough for us to be persuaded that he was brilliant and this was a brilliant idea. Even if we liked the way it fit together, it had to also, we had to also be able to stand in that truth from our own experience. Because otherwise our capacity to be on the path is always going to be brittle if it's based on certain expectations we've set up and then those expectations are disappointed. You know, this is what the people who are in charge here are like. This is what the group is supposed to do. These are the values. And then if they disappoint you, you don't have anything of your own still to stand on. And also, we just set up expectations in our mind. Now that I'm meditating, now that I'm a disciple, now that I'm a Kriyaban, now that I'm doing whatever it is, this is what my life is going to look like. And it's going to bring me these things, and it's not going to bring me those things, and all of that, good luck, kids, is about all I can say. We don't know what our own karma is, and Divine Mother's going to play it out for us. And if we've, in our minds, made a deal, whether it's conscious or subconscious, this is what's known as a Vaishya. This is a second caste. The Vaishya caste is the merchant caste. And I'm happy to give good value as long as I get good value back. But to really be a devotee, you have to move up to be at least a kshatriya. And the kshatriya is what's known as the warrior caste. And it's warrior because you're doing battle with yourself. It's also because the soldier is the archetype of one who lives only for ideals, not for self. Sacrificing physical comfort, even life itself, the warmth of home, whatever it might be, in order to live by and defend something that is so much greater than who I am at this point. And that's what we're looking for when we're trying to be devotees. Which is, I'm not doing this to get an easier ride. I'm not doing this for the reward. I'm not doing this because everybody else then will look at me and think, aren't I something or another? Right. I'm doing it because I understand in my soul that this is the principle, these are the ideals I want to live by. And if nobody is watching, if I'm alone on the planet, this is still what I would do because it is who I am. So when Swamiji was talking, this is what I was saying, he always helped us to bring it down. I say down, I would say into this world might be a way of saying it, to a level that we could actually grasp. Just a moment, there's a thought floating there. Let me find it for a minute. Well, I can't. Oh yes, so that, you know, when he was with us, and you can see it, of course, in his books just beautifully, all 150 of them. So it's not like you have a dearth of evidence to this point. But he would always, no matter how elevated the idea, especially in conversation, I'm thinking now, he would just start showing us how it applied, or give us, he would fill in the gap It was perfect. He was perfectly capable of accepting a course of action because he felt Master wanted him to do it. He had earned the right and earned the confidence from many, many, many years of discipleship to simply trust what came to him. And it would have been extremely simple for him to have imposed on us his certainty. Well, Master wants me to do it this way. This is what Master told me. This is my intuition. And many people in his position would do that because it's faster and it's easier. And he doesn't have to do all the things that you have to do if you don't do that. But Swami himself, in his book on leadership, said, the last recourse of a weak leader is to claim access to special information that no one else can access. Because then he just says, well, we have to do it. But it's not our own. So he would always, even big initiatives that he would take or decisions, he would spend time with all of us and sort of himself build the bridge between what he might have intuitively known was correct and what we could understand. Because intuition and common sense are not opposites. You know, analysis and a list of pros and cons don't necessarily flow with intuition, but common sense is something quite different. So that's why, don't put your pearls before swine. Gee, who would be dumb enough to do that? That's sort of like, you have to have enough common sense to be on the path. But one of the questions that's often asked, and it's a very natural one to ask, especially when you're with a teacher like Swamiji, you know, which is, why did God make creation at all? Just why did he do it? It just seems so goofy. So the Vedantic answer, which is a valid answer, is God wanted to enjoy himself through many. That's the beautiful sort of poetic answer. And the self-evident answer is, well, he's not enjoying himself through very many. And if he's in charge of the whole thing, couldn't he make it better than it is? So this is what you run into. So Swami's answer was very simple. He said the nature of God is joy. Bliss is the singular reality of this creation. The singular reality of all of consciousness is bliss. If we didn't know that on some deep part of ourselves, when we were unhappy, we would be content to be unhappy. Think about it. A great deal of our unhappiness is a rebellion against the fact that we're unhappy. Because some part of us knows that this is wrong. This is not who I really am. So we claw our way back from whatever suffering we have, and we would not be motivated, we wouldn't even try, except that we know that we are made for bliss, because that's the nature of creation. So then Swami says, it's the nature of bliss, it's the nature of joy to want to share itself. And then he used the simplest example. He said, if you find a new restaurant where you really like the food, I mean, nowadays you take a picture of it before you even tasted it, and by the time you finished your meal, everybody in your group knows about that restaurant. It used to be you had to tell people, but nonetheless, it was the same action. I'm enjoying this, and I will enjoy it much more if everybody else gets to have it. So simple, isn't it? So of course, when you discover a way of living, a way of understanding life itself that suddenly just opens the skylight and completely changes everything about your life, what is your first impulse? You want to share it, because it's the nature of joy to want to share itself. Now, the problem is, and this is what Jesus and everyone else here is addressing, is that it's not so simple as that. Because all of us are working through different kinds of karma. And one of the great challenges of life is not just to think, what pleases me, but what do the people around me actually need? And more simply, how can I help? Not just what do I want, but how can I actually help? How can I actually bring about in this world what it is that I want to do? And one of the great compelling forces that sometimes totally confuses us is how we cope with suffering, not only our own suffering, but in many ways, sometimes even more challenging. How do we cope with the suffering of others? Especially people who are close to us, people that we love, but even far away, people on the other side of the world, because nowadays we get to see all the pictures. We get to hear all the stories of people who's in war zones and their homes have been destroyed, and people who have been kidnapped and taken hostage. People whose houses have been burned by the forest fires. Whatever it might be, we feel that also, because the more our consciousness expands, the more we literally feel that. Lahiri Mahashaya gives us an example in Autobiography of a Yogi where he was sitting, meditating peacefully in his living room in Varanasi when he suddenly exclaimed that he was drowning. He's sitting in front of his disciples as he'd been sitting for many years in that spot. All of a sudden he's drowning. And it turns out the next day, an overloaded ferry in Japan went down, sank, and hundreds of people were drowned. And his consciousness being everywhere, he felt that suffering. So even the masters, Swamiji said to me once, and it was a very important statement, he said, because I am calm about the things that happen to me, he said, people get the impression that I don't feel it. He said, and I feel it more deeply because of the sensitivity and because of the awareness of the consequences. When I was with Swamiji, I have a strong mind and a strong will. I have some intuition on all of that, and I have confidence. Sometimes when I feel things or think things strongly, I have confidence. Sometimes that confidence is grossly misplaced, but nonetheless, it's a fundamental part of the spiritual path to be able to have confidence. I think I was standing here 2 weeks ago, and I think that was the subject. That's what I was talking about. The woman who touched the hem of Jesus' robe. She had the confidence to go up and do that, to fight her way through the crowd and do that. And she got a miracle for it. So it's an important part of the spiritual path. So Swami he cultivated in us our own capacity to see and feel things, which is why he would reason it down with common sense so we could grasp it on our own, not just be mindlessly obedient. Because if you're mindlessly obedient, you're just always at sea, and somebody has to take you over, and that's not self-realization. So I would often have ideas or thoughts about how things should happen and what should happen with people and so on like that. Sometimes I was right, sometimes I wasn't. But I began to see it. The picture was like this. Later on, 10 years ago, 12 years ago, we made that movie about Ananda, Finding Happiness, which some of you have seen. I was part of that, and I loved the whole movie-making process. It was like if I didn't already have a job, I might have gone and looked for another, but I got to just play out a little karma. But when you do something like that, or in a television studio, or, well, actually, even if you're just sitting in your living room doing YouTube videos now, the camera sees like this. And in the movie, just an inch outside the camera frame, there could be a gigantic chaos going on, but all the camera would see was this fixed little scene. And so what I began to realize that my perspective on life basically was there would be a certain point when I'd become aware of what was happening. Maybe I'd get a news report of something that happened to somebody or one of my friends. They'd enter my frame. And then I could watch them move across the frame. And then as far as I was concerned, they exited my frame. And I began to realize that my perception of things was not wrong within my frame. But that Swamiji did not have a frame. And by the time people entered the frame, there could be incarnations of experience. And when they came across him here, all of that was with them. You know, think about all the lifetimes that we've all had, how many times we've all been together, how many issues we're still working on. And so he could see where we'd come from, and he could also see where it was going. And so the decisions that he would make here were very, very different than my little box. You're suffering, I must keep you from suffering. This is unjust, I must fix it. Why is this happening? It shouldn't be happening. Oh, and then please listen to me, please listen to me. You know, just think about it. We see what we see, and what happens? We panic. We panic. And yes, of course, they are suffering. But is my panic reaction actually going to be useful to you? If I manage to force you to be different, if I became yet another problem in your life, another hysterical element over here, will that be helpful to you? There was a very interesting response that Swamiji had in Assisi, Italy, where our Ananda community is. It's about 20 miles outside of the city. There's this, it's on a ridge, and you go down the ridge to go into the city. And at some point, unfortunately, some young man was killed on the road there. I don't know what the deal was. Maybe he was drunk or careless or what, but he died on a certain spot. And the people who loved him made a little shrine. So right on this little road, there was a little shrine. And there were always fresh flowers on that shrine, because he'd been a man maybe in his 20s, I was told. And Swami sort of began to ask, you know, there's always fresh flowers there. And it went on for a year or 2 years, and there were always fresh flowers. And Swami said, what is this? And it was that the mother, the grieving mother, would constantly keep the fresh flowers there. You know what Swami's response was? Oh, that poor man. I mean, who would think, oh, that poor man? He said he's going to have to close his heart to her because he's moving on. He's going into his next incarnation. That life was over. And here she is, she's holding and pulling him and grieving. And from this side, everybody thinks, oh, look at her beautiful dedication. Swami goes outside the frame. And even in the moment, although he didn't say it, I wouldn't be surprised if he could feel that man's consciousness, trying to go on and having this person holding him like that. Because we don't know what to do with suffering. So we find the spiritual path and we're so excited. Oh, finally, it makes sense. Here's karma, here's reincarnation, here's the grace of God, here's Kriya Yoga, here's the vrittis. You know, you just get so excited. And, you know, I too, you run out and you want to tell everyone. When we first found, my friend and I first found the spiritual path, we drove from California to New York City to tell one of our best friends, you know, you have to hear about this. Fortunately, he did want to hear about it. He did qualify. But it was just, we dedicated a whole summer, moved 3,000 miles, because we were so excited about what we'd learned. Because it's the nature of joy to want to share itself. However, waking up on the spiritual path is more subtle than that. And if you try to impose this on people when it's really not their receptivity, just as we were saying today, things happen that aren't helpful. Well, for one thing, people can grab it for the wrong reasons. And it said, as Swami was writing, the greatest danger is that if they pick it up in the wrong way. During those very first years, I remember there was a friend of ours who became a thief on the basis of Vedanta. well, it's all a dream anyway, so if it's your dream possession or my dream possession, like what difference does it make? And he was very cleverly using it that way. We met a man, I say we, it was with Swamiji, this man who was very evil. That's the only word I can think of. He was a genuinely evil man, and we were astonished to find out that he was more or less a serious student of this path. And Swami's response was, well, he can't have come into it for devotion. He could only have come into it for power. You see? Because you also hear about this, and if it's not really right for you, then you twist it. And, well, you know, but if you look at the big frame, it's a necessary vritti, and people will go through it. But we have to ask, what's really helpful? And this is where the Gita gives us, don't give it to people who lack self-control, people who lack devotion, people who are not interested in serving others, people who aren't interested. Oh, duh. Gee, if someone's not interested, maybe that's a clue why I shouldn't talk to them about it. Or people who speak ill of the divine. But thinking from the positive side, if those are the things that would make you not qualified, how can we understand what those mean for those of us who are qualified to hear, who lack self-control? In other words, people who are just looking for something to make it easier for them. You know, like my acquaintance who became a thief. Now he's justified philosophically, he can become a thief. He's not really gathering his own energy to make an effort to transform himself. He hasn't yet become a kshatriya. One of the characteristics of Vaishya versus kshatriya. The Vaishya, who is the archetype is the merchant, but the method the Vaishya uses in order to find happiness is that everybody around me conforms to what I want. You control people, you control circumstances, you get lots of money, you make the world conform. You become very political and you use your political power to make the government match what you want. All of these things. This is Vaishya. I will be happy, I will be safe, I will be secure when the world makes me safe and secure. It's not about me. Good heavens, no. It's about them. And what happens if you try that out long enough is, gee, how is that working for you? You know, not so good. Because you can't. So then it occurs to you, I need to change myself. This is when you become a kshatriya. That's how you shift from Vaishya to kshatriya. Ah, the battle is me. Happiness is changing my consciousness. So you have to have a modicum of self-control. You have to understand where the battle really takes place, which is in myself. And if you're giving these teachings to people who haven't even understood that, then it will do them damage. It can. I mean, for all of you who tried to convert your unqualified relatives, I'm not saying you've already hurt them. I'm only saying it can. And therefore, it's just don't. You know? When I saw Swamiji, I was remembering, I'm going to give a little commercial for a book that I myself wrote. I have a CD player in my car, and I was in my car and I had a long ride, and I didn't have what I thought I had with me, but I had the CDs of the book Swami Kriyananda as We Have Known Him. I did an audio book of that. My goodness, that's a good book. And the audio is pretty darn good too. I mean, quite impersonally. Stories are incredible. They're just so beautiful. And it was nostalgia for me too. Of course, I wrote that. That book was published in 2006. But one of the stories in there was being with Swamiji on holiday in Goa, India. I'm probably not going to get to the rest of the qualities, so I'm going to acknowledge right now that I'm just going to let them go. We were in Goa, and at that time, there was this little shop, and there was a tailor and a jeweler who shared this little shop. And just little enterprises, but this big hotel, a couple of big hotels were nearby, so that was how they ran it. And I went into the tailor, and Swami, we were just on holiday, so he came in and he sat down in there, and he sat down next to the jeweler. And the jeweler was a very, very Rajasic man, just very, just sort of all over the place kind of guy. Could never sit still for anything like this. But so while I was doing whatever I was doing with the tailor, Swami's having this conversation with the jeweler. He admires some of his things. The jeweler shows him some stones. Swami wears a gem bangle. He pulls it out. He shows him all of this like this. They talked about the weather. They talked about politics and so on like this. And then we all left. And then I came back later alone to pick up my thing, and the jeweler, in his restless way, rushes out. "Who was that man?" he said. He said, "I've met so many swamis and so many, sadhus here." He said, "I've never met a man like him." And then he said, honestly, I loved it, "Look at me." He said, "I'm a worldly man. I have so many desires. I smoke cigarettes, like this." He said, and so all we talked about, he said, we didn't even talk about anything. But I've never felt a consciousness like that. Swami didn't say a word. He didn't say a word about anything that he was actually doing, because he didn't need to. He just let the man experience and decide. So he became interested to that extent. He believed it was possible. And of course, I just told him who he was, but I didn't bother to tell him 100 other things I could have said, because it wasn't helpful, And so just to add just a little, you need to have devotion. You need to be ready to do more than just think about it. Swamiji said once he gave a lecture at some university, a major university in the US, and afterward, and the very, very smart college kids, he said they asked him the most interesting questions. He said they had a long question and answer session. And he said, afterwards, though, he said he knew they would just go home and think about it and come back with a whole bunch more questions. That they really did not have devotion. They weren't ready to think, to shift from just the interesting ideas into the fact that, because here's what it is about devotion, and you must understand, it's not that they were too smart to be on the spiritual path. Good heavens, Kriyananda is the most brilliant man I ever met. You don't become less intelligent on the path, but unless you feel it, you see, Swami said this in another place about what it is to really share the teachings. You have to magnetize the heart. In other words, you have to have a feeling for it. You have to desire it. It's as simple as that. You can be totally fascinated, but you have to want it. That's what devotion means. It's not just that Sri Ram, Jai Ram, Jai Jai Ram. It's not just that. It's how you feel inside. And if you don't really want it, it's just a waste of energy. Now, I've used up all my time, and I have a whole lot more to say. But I'm not going to be able to say it. But God bless you.
Where he dwells, the earth in gladness puts forth green herbs, shading trees. Gay streams bound through sun fragrance blows on every breeze. Gay streams bound through summer meadows, fragrance blows on every breeze. They with happiness are blessed, who the Lord have made their guest, who the Lord have made their guest. In you dwells the earth in gladness, puts forth green herbs, shading trees.
I've heard your flute high on a cloud, your call I can't resist. Oh, let me come and play with you. We'll scatter music with the dew and sound the morning mist. I've heard you piping on a hill, all else I've set aside. Oh, let us dance the mountain peaks, we'll skip with breezes on the creeks and soar the valleys wide. Your flute has called me to the fields. Now I've no place to live. Don't send me back, rejected friend. Whatever I called mine must end. All that I am, I give. I hear your call in every tree, in every flower and stream, and sweetest melody of all, a song that heaven's joy recalls. Here in my heart you see.